let's take a look at work conditions and culture. Focusing on the cultural aspect of people's work situations may lead to reduced interest in manager influence. According to organizational and work psychology, the content of work, including its skill level, variety, scope, degree of freedom, and perceived significance, is important for job satisfaction, motivation, and mental health. Changes in work conditions trigger cultural redefinitions. For airline pilots, for example, technological development has meant that flying manually is a diminishing part of work, while flight management is more central. Culture elements are embedded in both the material situation and the social structures of organizations. Research is unconcerned about work conditions of an organization or a work group. Instead, very general culture types and variables are emphasized. Bureaucratic cultures are hierarchical and rule-oriented, formalized and structured. Supportive cultures embrace shared values and goals and cohesion. Innovative and supportive cultures are more inclined to lead organization members experiencing meaningful work tasks, relationships, and goals and values. The variety of work practices often tends to lead to a variety in cultural orientations within organizations. One reason why what people do is important for cultural orientations is that it affects interaction patterns. Physical closeness and need for cooperation between workers involved in a labor process are central here. Shared work experience often mean the development of shared meanings around work. Cultural patterns cease to exist unless they're repeatedly enacted as people respond to occurrences in their daily lives. Often executives may be quite remote from what's expressed within work groups and departments at lower levels within the overall organization. Skills in communication and charismatic qualities, cooperative practices broadly in line with rhetoric, and an extraordinary cooperative situation which captures the attention of many employees who contribute to such influence. Groups engaged in natural communication associated with everyday work have a significant say in the development and modification of guiding ideas, beliefs, and values. These interactions may marginalize any impact from top managers communicating values. It's difficult to capture the essence of an organizational culture. A shift of focus in organizational culture research might suggest that the cultural cannot be separated from the social as an independent system. Ideas and beliefs are part of material existence and of people's everyday life in the labor market and in politics. Culture is a driving force behind social change. People's consciousness is developed in intimate interaction with social preconditions. The main thrust of research might then be shifted to the organization and the various communities within it, based on social class, profession, age, and so on. From a management point of view, this may be seen as making cultural influencing work more complicated, and this probably is valid for top management aiming to distribute general messages across the organization. But for most managers, it simply means connecting work practices and culture. Organizational culture research, in the midst of addressing organizational men and women and storytellers, humorists, right performers, and myth believers, in short, symbol lovers, should not forget that they're also producers and workers. The latter terms are not normally understood as metaphors, but in the sometimes strange world of organizational culture studies, they seem to belong to a foreign frame of reference. Worker or producer might proactively be used as a metaphor to throw light on organizational culture. Let's return to the question of metaphors for organizational culture. These metaphors are relevant not only to conceptualizing the content of culture, but also to the way cultural manifestation on the organizational level can be understood in terms of the different social entities involved. Some authors see organizations as micro-entities embedded in a larger social structure. Others regard the work group as an entire culture with certain idiosyncrasies and strong boundary lines between itself and other groups. The expressions used for culture frame our understanding of phenomena. Cultural studies are very much a matter of discovering subtle patterns, and our conceptualizations must encourage sensitivity to these. Whereas the phrase organizational culture or corporate culture in itself may lead to assumptions of uniqueness and unity, other expressions suggest other views. Conceptualizing an organization as culture-bearing environments is a more open-minded and cautious approach. A strong case can be made that societies put strong imprints on organizational cultures. When moving from one industrial organization to another, one may observe similarities which differ from behavior elsewhere in society. Here, the entire industry is conceptualized as a subculture, and individual organizations as subcultures themselves. It's important to bear in mind problems in studying something as vague and large-scale as national cultures. Another macro-level focus may include societal trends and dynamics. The so-called institutional theory school emphasizes a trend implying that organizations become more alike. Patterns or meanings are imported from various instances outside individual organizations, having broad and fairly homogeneous impact across organizations. Associated with a macro approach is also the long-term history of cultural tradition putting its imprints on the organizational level. At the same time, it's important not to translate general cultural patterns directly into the working life. Individualism may be positively valued in the US, but so also are team playing, loyalty, and managerial prerogative, strongly circumscribing individualism at the workplace. Appreciating the role of gender, age, occupation, and other sources of social differentiation, which are in no way restricted to characterizing the individual organization, means that variation at the organizational level can be taken seriously. A macro view on organizations does not necessarily mean a neglect of variation within organizations. A micro or local perspective typically views the organization as the macro context and its subcultures as more important. Such a local perspective may use the term subculture, but frequently its proponents refrain from explicitly or implicitly giving priority to the organizational level, that is, defining sub in relationship to it. Within organizations are groups that have different backgrounds and professional affiliations, but high degrees of internal interaction and consequently share rather little across groups. In addition, it's often important to consider various ethnic groups and the diversity issues sometimes associated with these leading to divisions within organizations. Diversity can be positive, but it's also a source of problems. It's also vital to consider that possible cultural differences between groups visible outside work are not necessarily noticeable at the workplace level. Generally, the idea of a single, organizational level corporate culture was very popular earlier. Today, most scholars emphasize the presence of subcultures in organizations. Of course, this creates both integration and differentiation at the same time. Within managerial ranks, people are exposed to a distinct set of symbols and meanings, but it's experienced differently depending on level. For those outside the circles of the privileged, meanings of being second class may lead to a strong them and us feeling. The idea of a unique and unitary organizational culture is contested from two different viewpoints. First, that organizations are products of the macro-level phenomenon like society, and second, that variations within organizations are much more profound because of diversity of the groups involved. Some of the social and cultural variations within organizations can often be related to similar variations at the societal level. Ethnic issues in organizations also often bear imprints of cultural ideas and multicultural issues in society at large. The interesting cultural aspects of organizations are not necessarily what's unique for a single organization, but the deeper and broader patterns that to some extent are a part of a more general business, industrial, or societal culture. The view of organizations as having unique and unitary cultures is widespread, and it encourages the treatment of the relationship between environment and culture as weak and indirect. However, this viewpoint misses an understanding of organizations' cultural embeddedness and its open relationship to the cultural aspects of its environment. One way to handle the dynamics between organizations and their cultural environments might be to talk about its members being citizens and as such influenced by societal culture. Changes in the environment like ethnic relations or attitudes to work affect people not only outside but inside workplaces. This view that senior leaders create cohesive organizational culture has lost credibility. It's often closely linked to an idealistic notion of culture that a set of overall meanings, ideas, and values communicated by senior management will lead to a strong sense of direction and priorities shared with the organization. Two alternative but complementary forms of critique have emerged. One emphasizes work, context, and everyday life that implies a strong variation in complex organizations. The specific tasks of work groups, rather than the overall business of the company, are decisive for the meanings and ideas of various groups. The other critique of unitary and unique management-shaped organizational culture emphasizes circumstances around the specific organization. Organizations are culturally shaped through meanings associated with macro forces in large groups widely distributed throughout various settings associated with notions, religions, industries, occupations, education, and so on. These meanings may be fairly thin, but can still be important for collaboration and a sense of shared interest and direction.